Get that. No.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We are ready to get going for our first Land Use Committee meeting. I thank everyone for coming here on this early rainy morning. I would like to welcome everyone, and I would like us all to go around the room and just say briefly who we are, what our involvement with the city is, and just to give an idea to all of us in the room. Maybe I know all of you, but not everybody might know each other. So I'm Beth Moreau. I am a city councilor here at the city of Portsmouth, a long-term planning board member prior to this. I am also by day a real estate attorney. I do residential title services, so I've had a lot of involvement both with the city and with real estate and with title and zoning and land use and all of that. And this whole brainchild came about due to a conversation with myself and the mayor and a bunch of initiatives that we'd like to move forward through the city, and hopefully this committee is going to be able to help make some of those recommendations.
I'm Councilor Rich Blaylock. I'm also on the Historic District Commission. I own the old Fair Landing restaurant in downtown Portsmouth. I've lived here all my life. I've lived in 3 of the 5 wards. I'm pretty familiar with Portsmouth. I also currently paint houses, painting on Sunset Road today. And I coach football at the high school and Little League as well. But yeah.
Joanna Kelly, assistant mayor. I also own Cup of Joe. It's a cafe and bar downtown. So workforce housing is really big on my agenda because I'd like my staff to be able to live where they work. That's really all about me.
You're a newly homeowner, right?
Oh, and I just bought my first home in Maple Haven. So it's now everything's an additional 10 minutes to get anywhere.
So my name is Corey Clark. I've been on the planning board with Councilor Moreau since 2016. I am a professional engineer. I work for the state of New Hampshire in the Dam Bureau, overseeing reconstruction of state-owned dams. I'm a father of 3 little kids, 2 of which are in the New Franklin district. 1 will be in the New Franklin district in a couple of years. So that's where I'm at.
I'm Rick Gelman. I'm a professional engineer and licensed land surveyor, also on the planning board, chair and Corey's vice chair. I'm pretty plugged into land use, both nationally and internationally. The work I do, writing and editing form-based codes, downtown enhancement plans, that sort of thing.
I'm Sarah LaChance. I'm a member of the Portsmouth Economic Development Commission. My day job is working at Liberty Mutual in our global cybersecurity organization, and workforce housing has been an ongoing topic since I've been on the EDC since 2016, and even prior to that. So very happy to participate on behalf of the EDC.
Good morning, I'm Craig Welch. I'm the Executive Director of the Portsmouth Housing Authority. We own and operate 605 apartments, rental apartments in the city, throughout 11 different properties. And in June, we'll open our 12th property downtown, adding 64 new permanently affordable housing units to the city. And we've been developers and owners and managers here in Portsmouth since 1953. We've been doing this for a long time.
Great. And?
Nick Recknell, the principal planner in the planning department.
And Beverly, would you like to just, say a few words about yourself?
Good morning, everyone, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm flying to go see my daughter and my son today, so but I'm glad to be here. Beverly Mesa-Zent. I'm the Director of Planning for City of Portsmouth.
Great, thank you. Both Beverly and I have been working on an overview of land use, so I'm going to pass around, actually, one for you, one for me. Pass around this handout, and if anybody, I did make enough that there's probably enough to pass to any members of the public that are here as well. And then I will let Beverly kick off this, and there are a couple of links that are within this handout, and I have copies of those links and the information from that. If people are truly interested, they can take one of those as well. I can pass them around if people want, but Beverly, if you'd like to just start with our overview that we talked about.
I don't know if you'd like to first address the committee purpose, Councilor Moreau, that was approved by the City Council. I think so that if you'd like to go over that, or I could read that as well.
Oh, I can do that. For those that have not heard me say this 20 times, the purpose of this committee is to review all current zoning and policies surrounding housing and development to encourage sustainable, diverse, and affordable development, including expanded multimodal transportation. We are to report back to the City Council on recommended alterations to the zoning and existing policies, along with any new zoning or policies to be considered important to furthering the city's goals.
Thank you. I provided just a little bit of background information. I mean, housing is a very complex topic. I worked in housing in Seattle on a couple different interjurisdictional teams, writing housing policies for the Seattle metro area. But I feel like I'm just beginning to learn about housing. But in the handout I provided to you, it does provide some definitions, or at least attempts to provide a definition about what affordable housing is. And this is really, there's no actually fixed definition, but essentially we tend to talk about housing is based on how much affordable housing a community has, and that's typically based on the area median income, what people are spending for housing, and for folks who are spending more than 30% of their income based on the area median income and their earnings, that's considered a cost-burdened segment of the population. Those who are spending more than 50% of their earnings on housing and housing-related, that includes utilities and housing-related expenses, are considered severely cost-burdened. And that's typically a way that we tend to sort of segment out the housing needs for the region. New Hampshire has passed a workforce housing law that basically sets a standard for jurisdictions to provide housing for a certain AMI segment. For rentals, they've defined that as it would need to be affordable to a household with an income of no more than 60% of the area median income. And then I believe for ownership, it is up to, I think it's 80 to 100% of the area median income for a 4-person household. So these are sort of the targets that the state has provided for us. When I first started talking to Councilor Moreau about this, and she mentioned all the folks that she'd like involved in this group, we started to talk about maybe a broader range and of housing, not just that addresses those folks who are maybe in the 80 to 100, the typical workforce up to 100% AMI, but maybe those folks who are earning less than that. And there's some examples. I put up what that number means for Portsmouth. And for Portsmouth, the Portsmouth, Rochester, HUD Metro Fair Market area, this translates for renters to $53,570,000. That would be for renters at 60% AMI, and for homeowners at 100% would be about $99,000 a year. But I'm sure that many of you would recognize that there are many folks who make considerably less than that. And so in light of the fact that the workforce housing is a specific area that we potentially can use market tools for, there is a lower AMI group that many of you are experts in that we might want to consider in this discussion as well. I provided a slide that I had used before, and that is also in your packet. And this was a slide that I had used to talk about this when I was in Redmond. And it basically just breaks down really the strategies that work within each of those target areas. The first box of that slide that has all the buildings in it, that basically just explains that affordability must be underwritten. It lowers project revenues and the return for developers. Construction and land are the major cost components of housing, but there are very few opportunities to limit the costs. And so when housing is made affordable, it lowers the project revenue that's needed for debt service. It lowers the project revenue that is the return on investment the developers get, and sometimes that will tip it into an area where they don't want to develop because they want to make sure they get that ROI based on the investors. And so we really want to basically really understand what tools we can use to keep to get some market rate housing, some market, I would say, delivered housing. and then also the market supported housing, which is at a lower AMI level. So if you look at closing the gap, that is basically the gap in revenues that is created by affordability. There is some tools that are available on the municipal side, and that's the side that I think some of us are really ready to roll up our sleeves and start working on. And this is the regulatory side. This is the side that works with the market, understands what essentially developers will respond to in terms of an incentive package. We can't require that they do it. We have to sort of combine carrots and sticks together. And I think the carrots become density, height, and if they want to get it, they have to provide workforce housing. We have some incentives, and I think Nick can talk to you about a little bit more about why those aren't working, but developers are not choosing that because they're looking at their total, how the project pencils out, and they tend to choose other incentives that will allow them to get the density. And that is something that's going to need to be changed and potentially changed by area in town, because the market prices and land prices are a little bit different. But the tools that are available on the regulatory side, and these tools typically work with the market to try and get the market to provide that housing. And that tends to be within the 80 to 120 AMI range, because the market can still, the offset that they lose with the affordability, they can potentially make up in density because the difference is not so great typically. I think on ownership units, the difference becomes a lot greater, but we can usually sort of create that a balance there where they're still going to come in and the incentives to get the density and the height becomes great enough that it offsets the requirement or to provide workforce housing. Land use incentives, as I mentioned before, density bonuses, these are all tools. By right density is another way to deliver housing. It's a great tool in jurisdictions where the market may not be quite as strong as Portsmouth, because just adding houses, a lot of times in a lot of communities in New Hampshire would address the issue of the workforce housing prices, because the land values, the cost of construction all pencil out to deliver a house at the 80 to 120 AMI level. In Portsmouth, I believe that we have been adding density at a fairly robust speed. I know that those of you who are on the Planning Commission know that this is true. We're adding a lot of housing units. Nick has some good data on that about how we've almost in the past few years, we've upped our housing production by 3 times. We are a community that allows density, but it is still not delivering the workforce housing that we want. Expedited review and parking reductions all become things that essentially lower project costs and allow for that the opportunity cost that's lost by providing affordable housing to be made up by the developer. In the supported market side, some of you are better experts than I am in this, and this would be targeting lower AMI groups that do make less than $50,000 a year, but really are vital to the community in terms of the jobs that they perform and what they bring to the community in our businesses. And also for, I think, younger members of the community that we're trying to attract often will be looking for those entry-level opportunities. Things that are available there: fee waivers, public funding or land contributions. And then one tool is alternative compliance funding. And that is basically when we require the market to deliver affordable housing for density and they say, well, we'd rather just pay into a fund. It's a tool that should be used, with strategically and carefully, because it prevents that integration throughout the community, but it's a tool that's available. And then low-income housing tax credits. There's some federal opportunities there. I'm sure Craig and many of you could speak to a whole host of things that are at this supported market side. So in light of the fact that we have really 2 separate buckets, Councilor Morone and I talked about, really, is there a way to break the committee up into 2, maybe a regulatory side that's working on city regulations that really will try and understand how we can really make the market deliver more. We can't require it. In other states, we can say every time you construct more than 10 units, you're going to have 10% affordable. That is something that's allowed in some states, not in New Hampshire. So we have to kind of combine some carrots and sticks together. And that would be the regulatory side. And then the other side would be a side that works on land contributions, city funding, a fee in lieu fund, which could be converted to a housing trust fund, which I understand we have established, and then other federal tools that would add to that capital stack that would allow some affordable housing to be created at the 60% or potentially even lower side. And so this is kind of the thinking as we started to tackle it. There's a lot of work within these two categories. I am not the subject matter expert in either one of them, but look forward to learning a little bit about both. And I'd like to just kind of ask Councilor Moreau to kind of take it from here and talk really about next steps, the structure, and then what we hope to achieve in the near term.
Thank you very much, Beverly. We have done a lot of thinking around this and a lot of talking around this. I've kind of given myself sort of some initiatives that I want us to do. And I think by splitting us into two working groups, that when we come back together to give, I think we'll get more work done. That was the theory behind doing that. So that's why both Beverly and I plan on participating in both groups so that there is some continuity between and not any overlap, and we can ensure that. But that is our goal, is to be able to have, because there's going to be a need for a lot of research and a lot of looking at what we have and where we're going and looking at the data and making sure it's going to take us in the right direction. With that said, I really, I think I see the sort of supported market group as being also the group that would take a look at all city-owned property and see what availability we have with what city-owned property we have, and how we should use that property to basically further our goals. As a city council, we've put together an initiative of goals, and this entire committee was basically born out of those ideas that came out of that specific strategic planning day. So that city-owned property would be one of them. The other thing that group is going to look at, and I sort of see this as sort of a longer term, is we have some new initiatives on the state level that are in sessions right now, and one of them is a bill that they're calling the sort of a community toolbox. But part of that bill talks about housing opportunity zones, which gives incentives under 79E. And I still am learning a lot more about that, but that's one of the things I think that group can really dig into and see whether or not that's something that would be an opportunity for us under an economic development portion of being able to really try to make sure that we're giving the most incentives that would get developers to be able to, give us the housing that we really need and at an affordable price. So those are the kinds of things that I think they're going to look at. I also want the regulatory side to take a really deep dive into accessory dwelling units is one of my top priorities for that group to look at. I was there when we created all of that zoning, and I thought we did a pretty darn good job to get it started. At this point, I think we can look at what it's created and what it hasn't, and I think we could really take a deep dive into whether or not certain ADUs, if you meet our criteria or whatever that criteria we finalize that we feel is correct, could actually be by right, so that you wouldn't have to go before the planning board for a conditional use permit if you actually meet all of the criteria in a list. So that's one of the things I'd really like them to, and that's one of the things I'd like us to be able to, within 30 days, have recommendations to the city council to go back to planning and then back to city council in a big giant circle. Some of the other things that we want to look at is strengthening the incentives. When we first looked at the North End zoning, we worked really hard to try to find a way to create green space and workforce housing. All it's given us is community space and not a ton of green space. So I think we have to take a deep dive into what community space looks like, and I think we need to basically require workforce housing maybe instead of community space. But I don't know. I don't have the answers. I do know a lot of the issues and where they lie and what I can point the certain groups to look at. Also, if you're going to provide us, one of the other things, and if I say something out of turn, I'm sure Nick and Beverly can help me out with this, but one of the other things I thought we could also look at is whether or not we could streamline a process. If you're going to give us, a certain percentage of workforce housing, affordable housing, whatever we want to call it, can we then somehow streamline the process through the boards to be able to make it a quicker, less expensive process? So that's something that can be looked at as well through, I believe, the regulatory side. I think really needs to take a look at that. How do we promote through zoning more micro units? They don't have to be downtown. They could be in and around. I was excited to hear one of the projects that we looked at last night does have a bunch of studios, at least. They might not be micro units, but there are a bunch of smaller units, but they also went up to 3-bedroom units. So mixtures of housing, it would be nice to see a whole lot more of that. because especially not, it doesn't all have to be in the downtown core. We need to look like the gateway zoning actually started, and that was through the housing policy that I passed out. For those of you that don't know, that was initiated into the city back in 2016, and that was when we started the gateway zoning, the sort of opportunity to have these little villages of mixed residential and commercial all on corridors such as the Route 1 Lafayette Road. And it created the West End Yards, which has brought a lot of units. It's, created sort of the Portsmouth Green. It started all commercial and has added residential and is soon to add more residential. So that's kind of going based off of that. So those are the kind of things that I think that we really need to take a look at. And I would like to get feedback both from Nick, who I know has been taking a deep dive in, and whether or not I have missed anything you might already be thinking about or looking at. These are the things on the top of my mind. But I would like to hear from everyone as far as what they feel their add-in to this can be and where they feel they see themselves helping us, because I do have some pretty lofty goals of some initial things like the ADUs, the incentive programs, all of that. I'd like us to be able to give recommendations back within 30 days. Beyond that, I think we then have to start to take some of the things that will take a little bit longer to look at and see where we go from there. So, Nick, do you have anything to add to that? Not to put you on the spot or anything, but I'm going to ask everyone, so.
No, those are lofty goals. Maybe a lofty timeline. Yeah, it's a complicated endeavor we're on here.
We have to speak close to the microphones or the people on the recording won't be able to hear us.
So I guess maybe sticking with the housing theme, because obviously it's a land use committee and there's a whole raft of non-housing related stuff.
Yep.
I think we need to talk about.
And we can.
Yeah, right. Right. I want to make sure somewhere that fits into the timeline and an understanding
Maybe
of
not
what.
in the 30 days.
Right. What we're doing on the whole environmental piece, wetlands, buffers, resiliency, design review, which is indirectly related, in my opinion, to housing. I think we need to be cognizant of all the interrelated parts of getting housing improved and going through the permitting process, and not fail to recognize that some of the housing we're in fact approving with these big numbers, we're over 300 units a year in the last 5 years, and over 90% of it's high density stuff that's 3 to 5 stories. A third of it's in the Gateway, a third of it's downtown, a third of it's in the West End, that area. So most of our housing is high density. Most of our housing is in the urbanized areas, which is all good. Infrastructure exists. We're generally dealing with redevelopment projects, not greenfield development or green development of land that hasn't previously been developed. I think recent trends to sort of buck that progress, if you will, for housing production is related to some of these indirect impacts that need to be at least talked about and addressed for the design, scale, massing, location. How well we're actually producing the project is, I think, generating a good degree of acrimony out there, which is not lowering the cost of development. Through the appeal process more recently, we've got over 300 units under appeal. They're not under appeal for all bad reasons. There's some valid concerns there that need to be addressed that maybe aren't obvious. So I think it's going to be important for us in trying to at least maintain the housing production we've attained in the last 5 years, let alone improve on it, that we recognize there's a healthy contingency of residents that don't like the way we're growing, not just the rate we're growing, the way we're growing. And it's easy, I think, for a lot of us to assume it's kind of NIMBYism or it's a rate problem, it's change. Yeah, there's a piece of that, but there's a qualitative piece that I think is valid, and we need to explore that a little more. It won't be the same on every project. It won't be the same in every neighborhood or part of the city, but I think it's easily overlooked because it's also the hardest thing to solve. So I think these indirect pieces of design review outside the historic district sounds like a scary term, but we have none. So what we get is what the market offers. We have very little design control. Corey can speak to that. The planning board is horizontal construction. 95% of the constituents in any city or town don't understand that. They don't understand it's really utilities, parking. It's the stuff that matters a whole lot less than what you put on top of that land and how it integrates with the surrounding properties and the context of that neighborhood. So I do think there are regulatory amendments we can make to improve the planning board's ability outside the historic district to have some modicum of review as to what comes out of the ground on the site, because I can't believe that isn't creating some of the anxiety and resistance to more of that happening. Similarly, you look at Cinemagic, the recent project, so there's no design review on that. Whether you like the building or not, it's very contemporary, it's very bold, but 90% of the ground floor is parking. You know, there's a whole, and we can't really get to that with the existing code. And that's not the most effective way to activate a neighborhood. So I don't want to get down into the weeds, but some of the things on my list are, you know, dealing with site plan review standards, dealing with infill design guidelines, even in the historic district. The level of anxiety or acrimony is no less heightened outside the district than in. We've got problems on both sides, I think, with the HDC and their ability to get their arms around these redevelopment sites. Most of the appeals are in the historic district dealing with similar issues. You know, building height, little things like backfilling to create an extra story, that's a big annoyance for a lot of people. And it's a way for the development community to somewhat game the system, but we're the ones with the pen. So if we don't fix it, we kind of deserve to get it. But that's certainly adding to the list of concerns from residents as to buildings being actually artificially taller than what the code anticipated. I talked about wetlands, buffers, how we're going to either continue to interpret that code or change that code will have an impact on where development occurs. I think we've got really weak regulations outside our urbanized areas to deal with housing design, layout, everything. You know, if you look at the stuff we've been approving because our codes haven't been updated in decades along Peverly Hill Road, whether it's Banfield, Peverly, it's stuff that you would have expected to see in the 1950s for a design, and that's really disappointing, I think, for the people approving them, let alone the people that will look at them. But nobody lives there, so they tend to be, and people are a little bit fatigued from, you know, which projects they can actively participate in, not being in a butter. So I think we need to look at all our incentives and disincentives, carrots and sticks, in the PUD ordinance that we have, that again is decades, I think, since it's been touched. We don't require a yield plan. You know, we do, but we don't. I'm looking at you guys because you're on the planning board, but the Stokel property was, you know, to me, an embarrassment that we had that kind of process, that kind of ordinance, where the developer uses a formula to generate the base density rather than a yield plan of what would regularly go on the property if you just did a conventional subdivision. It more than trebled the amount of units that were allowed on the property by using an algorithm that doesn't really look at the constraints on the site versus a yield plan, which is more typical for the last 2 decades in most cities and towns. So, you know, you don't find these things sometimes till you're actually staring at one in the face, and then it's too late to change it for the particular project. But we can't forget to do these postmortems and go back and make adjustments. Similarly, I think the ADU, the ADU definitely has room for improvement. It's also complicated, and I think we need to be careful we don't go too quickly, that we overlook the harder components to adjust, like the design and the fit. It's not simple to put houses behind houses in established neighborhoods. It does have a profound, you think the tree fort was hard the last week. Imagine putting, you know, these garden cottages and carriage houses and such in the backyards of existing houses which is typically the only degree of privacy for the entire neighborhood is the rear yard. Their houses are close to the street, they're close to the neighbors on the side. The rear is really important. I'm not suggesting we can't do it, but we need to recognize that it's not simple. You just can't start plunking housing units, regardless of what they look like, and play a numbers game with the size of the unit, the height of the unit, and the distance from something, and start plunking them either as of right or with a lower bar in neighborhoods that are going to have profound impacts if they're not well designed on their abutters, which I think will lead to a backlash, and then we'll be unwinding things. So I think Portsmouth is such a great urban environment, overlooking some of the suburban and rural components of it. It's largely an urban city, and it's well designed. And it's well designed because it was designed before any of these rules went into effect and before cars took over, our life. So I think all the solutions are out there. We just need to be cognizant. The physical solutions are out there. We need to make sure we calibrate our regulations to respect that fabric, respect that land use pattern, and then I think we'll be successful, and we'll have less of this negative feedback that we're just all about numbers and volume, because that we're not actually achieving our goals when we create 300 units a year and 200 of them are under appeal, and 100 of the 200 never get built because of that. And that's the direction we're somewhat headed here, and I think we need to be very cognizant of where we're sitting. We did a lot. You mentioned 2016 with the gateway zoning. We've had over 700 units approved in the gateway areas. Some of those are under appeal, but these things take time to get approved and then get financed, get built, get finished. And I, like most of you, have no idea what the residents actually think of the West End Yards, what they think of Chimberg's project at Hannaford. I think we need to have a better understanding, and they need to be built and finished before, and there's some acclimation factor that people need for the change. But it's important to know what people actually think about what we're doing to understand how we go forward. But anyway.
I don't disagree with you at all, and I think bringing in the community on different aspects of what we're going to look at will be important. Maybe not the stuff we're doing immediately, because there'll be small changes to just try to tweak things. But as we take a look at some of the stuff you're talking about and some of the new legislation and how that could affect us, I definitely think we need to have a conversation about how we want to engage the community and how we want to have that discussion. But I want to let everyone have a chance to speak. So if Councillor Blaylock would like to give us his thoughts.
I think from just hearing these thoughts, I think I'd be probably more useful on the regulatory subcommittee, just being in the HGC, looking at land use incentives. All the below this listed here, the parking reductions. I've lived in Portsmouth. I've rented. I now own a home. I grew up obviously with my parents' home. I've witnessed, what it's like to grow up in Portsmouth, what it's like to have kids and have them try to buy a home in Portsmouth. Most of my friends don't live in Portsmouth anymore. Most of my friends have had to move out to Greenland or surrounding areas. But I think that's where I would probably add more value.
Great.
So I would say the supported market subcommittee, really, as Beverly mentioned and as listed here, the alternative compliance funding, I think, as a council and as myself, I'm always looking at ways that we can not only build more affordable apartments, but help people, buy first-time homes or buy homes in general. And for me, the fact that, our housing trust is pretty empty. I'm always trying to think about alternative fundings and ways to do that. So I would say I'm pretty much in that wheelhouse.
Excellent. Mr. Clark.
Thank you. I would say probably for myself would be regulatory subcommittee, just because of the fact of just my experience on the planning board, seeing these ADUs come in front of us, and the issues that a lot of them have in trying to get a square peg in a round hole with our current zoning. The same with the workforce versus community space. We always see the projects come in front of us, and we're always hoping for workforce, but it's ultimately always community space, and it's poor community space but they are meeting the intent. And then I think, like Nick was alluding to, by the time a lot of, there are some initial reviews, but ultimately a lot of the stuff, it's almost too little too late by the time, we're looking at final site plan review, that sort of thing, where it's like, I understand the concerns of the public when they're speaking to us, but ultimately they're meeting the zoning as is written. So dealing with that, obviously there's other little I don't want to call them loopholes, but basically they kind of are, where the developers do different things to meet that zoning, which on face value it looks like, I don't know how they're getting it to the public. It looks like, how are they getting this through? But once again, they're meeting it. And then obviously the wetland issues, the city has wetlands everywhere. But I think up until now, we've never really looked at, commercial versus residential. And when I say residential, I mean like single home residential. There's never been any differentiator between the two. And so I think, the issues we see with big commercial, big residential going in and wetland impacts, they're following the same sort of rules that, a single family homeowner is following when, their entire house is in the wetland buffer. So I think those issues need to be looked at as well. I will say, supported market subcommittee, if need be, to jump over, the whole idea behind city-owned property and the feasibility of, is this a buildable lot or not? Just the knowledge of what the various issues might be, I could certainly bring to the table as well. So,
Thank you. Mr. Shellman.
This is a lot of interesting interwoven topics here. I think what Nick was saying, I think I'd add a word, and that'd be quality to the design process. And there's not they're not disassociative. You can have affordable housing and still have quality design. And I think that's one of the reasons that there's been some pushback for some of the projects, and why we have some appeals pending, that people have seen things they didn't like. Developers follow rules, and also, as Nick said, we have the pen. So if they're doing things that people don't like, maybe those rules need to be changed, which is why we're here. And I've seen a lot of different ways of doing it. I don't know if we're supposed to select. I guess we are. I think, given my experience, the regulatory side would probably make a lot of sense. Another part of this that it came up last night at our planning board meeting, but it's also a big topic, and that's transportation. Transportation is very expensive, and in some communities, and I've worked in places like Jackson Hole and Nantucket and other places that are super high end, where the workers cannot live anywhere nearby. Some of the workers in Nantucket fly in every day. You can imagine that.
Fly in. Ooh.
Yeah. So, there's a lot to look at, and I'm wondering. I know there will be public outreach by the time this gets to council for conversation with you folks. But I wonder if it makes sense to also have some outreach to some of the developers to get some feedback. Where are the stumbling blocks? What has prevented you from doing what we thought we were doing with this workforce housing element, but you haven't done it? You gave us 4 trees, we wanted 4 units. I'd love to hear what that is. And for the 30-day thing, I think, and back to my quality design component, I think there's probably at least 2 tiers of development here. There's what has been historically a single-family home in Portsmouth that might be able to fit an accessory dwelling unit if it's done appropriately. And I would see creating a set of regulations where that could be done so expeditiously they don't need to hire hardly anybody. Maybe just their builder and a surveyor to make sure the boundaries fit. Then you've got the upper level things, the bigger projects where it's the whole design team. You've got architects and engineers and landscape architects and the whole panoply of professionals that we see. Much more sophisticated. They will pick apart things we can't even dream about yet. But like I said, they follow the rules. So I think the short term, getting those few units here and there may be an easier regulatory hurdle. And the more complicated ones, I think getting some feedback from some developers, and also I can do some outreach to some other people I know around the country, and I know Beverly certainly has a lot of experience on the West Coast, and she has a lot of contacts. So I think bringing those things together can help with this.
Great, yeah, and it is actually my hope. I've actually started to invite different people that I've been meeting along the way to come and talk about different things. So yeah, if there's other people that you guys want to hear from, I'm trying to bring in sort of quality people that have done different things. For instance, the economic development director from Exeter, I've heard him speak a few times for any of you that may have not heard him speak. And they put in some really sort of interesting twists on how they were trying to promote workforce housing. So he's willing to come and talk to us. Sarah Reitzman in the New Hampshire Housing is willing to come and talk to us about a lot of the housing opportunity zones and the 79E stuff that's going through the legislature right now. And depending on whether or not it gets put through, they'll come and give us, they're putting together right now for municipalities a toolkit, a brochure, so to speak, of how all of those things work. So anyone that you think might be useful to us, please come right ahead and let me know, because I'd be more than happy to reach out to them and get them to come and speak to this group.
One quick question. The regional planning commissions, I know obviously you're a representative there. Are they doing, or what are they doing on this topic right now?
They are in the midst, every regional planning commission throughout the state is in the midst of doing a housing assessment through this first year. They've started it, I think, last month or maybe the beginning of this month. So by the end of this year, they hope to have a housing assessment of the entire state done. The details of that are forthcoming, but they are working on that as we speak.
Councilor Moreau, I know they are also working on developing a dashboard that will be kind of a monitoring tool. And they had asked me, and I shared the dashboard that we were subject to in Seattle. And this morning, they'll be meeting with the architect of that dashboard, Janet Lee, who works for King County in Seattle. And so they're looking at not just identifying the need, but like a monitoring tool going forward.
Yeah, so hopefully the state will set that up so that all the commissions, as they get their data, can actually put it into this dashboard so people can actually access it more quickly, we hope. Great. And Ms. LaChance.
Yes. So I'd be interested in the supported market subcommittee. In all of the surveys and the feedback we've received from Nancy Farmer from an economic development perspective, that having places for workers to live that is in close proximity to where businesses are is important for businesses deciding to either locate or expand in Portsmouth. I'm also interested in the transportation aspect as well. I think that has to be part of the solution. And I don't know if there are opportunities similar to the film that we saw on Tuesday night at the music hall around large employers incentivizing housing and being part of the solution. I don't know from a parcel size or an employer size if we have those opportunities, but I think that's something to look at. And the last thing is, I think, the community input is going to be key, because it's the public and the citizens of Portsmouth that are going to come and speak out in support of or against policy or items that come before these boards. So it's really about belonging. Do people feel like the city as it's developing still welcomes them if they're a resident here, or if they want to move to Portsmouth, is there a place for them here? So I think we really have to connect this sense of belonging and the kind of city we are and want to be to the work that we're doing here.
I agree that transportation is going to go through every conversation, whether it be regulatory, secondary market. I think that is a huge part. I've said all along that you can't get affordable housing without making transportation part of that conversation. So I'm glad everyone's on board with that thought. And Mr. Welch.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Be sure you talk into the microphone or we don't get it on recording, that's all.
My frame of, I'm a resident of Portsmouth as well, so I'm interested in all this, but my frame of reference as the director of the Housing Authority, as a nonprofit, local nonprofit real estate developer. Our strategy has been and will likely continue to be multifamily housing development using low-income housing tax credits. We got $8 million in federal tax credits to build the Court Street project. We could come up with other strategies to do this, some scattered site development or some preservation or that kind of stuff. But right now, that's our core competency. And in that respect, finding places to do that, either to redevelop or or to develop new property on city-owned land. Obviously, land costs are high. That's really what we'd be interested in. We do have a supported market right now. The Court Street project, the Ruth Griffin Place, will be a little different in terms of the income that people will be needing to make in order to get into Ruth Place. But overall, our existing 600 units are all subsidized, and we're actually the largest housing authority per capita in the state. So arguably, we have done a great job at serving the lowest income people in our community. 85% of our residents currently are under that 30% of area median income, that extremely low income category. But of course, we all know that the housing that we're really missing, I think people are calling it the missing middle is the fashionable term right now. But we agree with that. The housing, we have commissioned a housing study, needs assessment. The city was going to do one, and we talked about doing it together, but we've just gone ahead and commissioned that. That'll be done in April or so, and I think that data will be really great for instructive for everybody here, even if our work is done or not done. And thanks to Nick and the city for being a great source of data for that kind of stuff. So that should guide what we do next. But so I'm interested in that. I mean, I would hope at some point we could debrief on what it's like to develop in Portsmouth on a regulatory perspective. We've certainly learned a lot, especially developing downtown in the historic district. Our project was appealed. It was brought all the way to the Supreme Court. I can tell you what that process was like and what that cost us in terms of money and time. So I'd love to be a part of that as well. This housing policy is probably not referred to a whole lot, and you guys put a lot of time into it, but it sure was by me when we were going through the land use process. And I would also continue to work on this, because what it says about streamlining the process and things the city can do that impact affordability is really relevant, because I think all the city staff, everybody was on board with that. But nobody, not nobody, but it was hard to implement that idea without some more specifics. Some things were specific, like contributing some capital improvement funds, that the city should do that kind of thing. And that's something that did happen. But to have stuff like this is, I think, really important. The master plan, the 2025 master plan was outstanding, I think, and mentioned some very specific thing that we were able to point to and say that, this is what we said, or this is what, you said, as we're doing. So I think the regulatory stuff is really important and is of interest, but in our frame of reference, we want to keep building. And we'd like to keep preserving. We haven't done that since we bought Wamisit Place at a foreclosure back in the 80s. But, just for example, the Rockland Street, the Portsmouth Place Apartments was what's called an expiring use property. It had a 20-year Section 8 contract. And through the Section 8 rehab program, a private developer or public developer could use funds and enter into a Section 8 contract directly with HUD. We don't have anything to do with that property or manage it or anything. Well, we do a little bit now, but when that contract expired, in a place like Portsmouth, the people don't renew it, and instead they sold it. And so that property was sold, I think, in December of 2019 for $4.2 million. We tried to buy it. We were unsuccessful in buying it, and then it was just sold again for an unsolicited offer for $10 million 2 years later. If that they will no longer be able to keep with that kind of debt service to be able to keep that affordable. So I also like to point out that it's going to take us 6 years and $15 million to build 64 units, and we've lost 48 overnight with that. And so just doing what we've done, and the largest expansion of affordable housing in the city in almost 50 years, and we're still going backwards. So, I also want to add that we should treat this like the crisis that it is. I also think planning board and people need to be making decisions and have the cover to be courageous and make these decisions and move some things along, because there's always objections, and I totally honor and appreciate, things like design review in districts outside of the HDC. As a developer, I hear that, and it sounds like cost to me, but I understand why we would want to do that kind of thing. But long way to say, I'd be interested in helping to figure out the where to get some other land and other resources.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for that input. And just so that everyone knows, I mean, everyone gets to partake in the whole final decision. It's just sort of the nitty gritty of looking at everything and really coming up with language and ideas. Thought it would be easier to not have all of us trying to do all of it. And I'm all about organization, and that organization really works for me. With that said, unless anyone else has any more input, I did leave a section for public comment, and we do have a few members of the public here. I don't know if we have any on Zoom either that might be interested, but anyone that would like. Yes.
So I definitely, as we talk about public, there was one group that reached out, and I just want to make sure it's the Professionals Design Alliance. They would very much actively like to play a role. They did a great job when we were looking at trying to implement outdoor dining, and they're just experts in their fields, and they're willing to volunteer their time, and especially I think that they would be a great asset when we look at community space, and a lot of them are landscape architects, and really think that that's when I was reached out to by one of their head people, Bob White, he and that group really believe, and I think a lot of citizens believe, like I believe a lot of planning board members, that it's just a big missed opportunity for us, and that it would really make high impact. So I just want to make sure that they are on kind of our top of our list for public input, and whether that's individually or whether that's
a speaker at a group,
or we even offer them to present some of their ideas. Absolutely.
Yeah, if you get me the contact person, I'd be happy to reach out and organize that.
Awesome.
All right, and if there's a member, I believe we have a member, just find a chair with a microphone.
Yeah. I feel like we took all the public chairs.
You kind of did.
Way to shift it to this side. We get to sit over there. My name is Elizabeth Bratter. I'm a property owner in Portsmouth. I usually use 159 McDonough Street as my address. I think this is a great idea. As someone who was literally looked for the zoning book in the library and ended up in the planning department, and somebody there gave me an old copy, and I literally read it cover to cover to get an idea of what was going on. And I realized it was a real shock that it is zoning, the zoning laws that make this city what it is. So the regulatory people, you're going to hear from me a lot, because I can tell you myself that I have a list of zoning ordinances that really need to be looked at, that really impact neighborhoods, that really have loopholes in them that the city may not be aware of until somebody finds them, some good lawyer finds them, but those are there, and they are very visible. For example, the wetlands has different rules for commercial development as opposed to single-family homes. So if you look at that, you might find it. I would outreach to the actual engineers that work with the developers, because developers, their motive is to make money. And I, as a landowner, want to make money off of my property. But the engineers know all the different things that are used in order to provide the developer with what they want to succeed at. So I would go with engineers. I'm curious how many of you are landlords? Okay. Oh, you are. Good. I think that landlords need protection, because a lot of times you get people in who are Section 8 or other things, and you give them a chance. And then when things start going awry, all of that money comes out of your pocket in the end. And I can tell you that I've spent as much as $40,000 to repair apartments from people who didn't take care of them, but it takes you up to 6 months to get them out. So there are wonderful Section 8 people. We have some in our apartments. They take care of the place, but there are others who really need a lot of supervision, and there's no protection for the landlords. I have concerns about ADUs in neighborhoods. I think they're a great idea, but as Nick said, they really need to be looked at very carefully, because if you have an ADU that's being used for an Airbnb and you have strangers coming into your neighborhood every day where your kids play, that's different than having a rental next door. And so that does need to be looked at very carefully. I think you need to find the balance between neighborhoods and growth. And I don't think that's what's happening here. I think that if the zoning allows it, the maximum is being put in. A good example is in the Islington Creek neighborhood. There are 3 houses on one lot that used to be a single family home, and they are cramped in there, but they actually were allowed to put 4, but we were able to get them down to 3. And yet across the street from this same development on Islington Street, I think they have 6 in there, but they were put in a way that actually looks nice, and they actually fit into the neighborhood. It's kind of overwhelming to see that many back there, but they actually did a nice job. So the design is an important piece of that. Let me see if I got all of my little things.
If you'd like to provide me with a list of your,
Maybe
concerns.
to the last mayor. I'm wondering if it ever made it anyway.
Why don't you email it to me, and I
Okay,
can make
I'll
sure
work
it
on
gets
it.
to this committee.
All right. And I think the medium income, in most of I am that person who has the micro units, which are really not called micro units. They're called efficiency apartments and 1-bedrooms. I'm also the person who has, every bedroom has a person living in it, a working person, because that's how they can afford to live in Portsmouth and in Dover. They need to each have their own room, and that's how they can afford it. And I'm very reasonably priced. I'm told by my tenants this. So it's not necessarily true, but they consider it. And literally 1 room is 1 person who is working. So it's something that really does need to be looked at. I think that's it for me. And please don't call them micro apartments, because they're really not. They're just efficiencies by another name. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any
you,
other members of the public that would like to give us a few moments? We started a little late, so going a few minutes past.
I'll go up here since she went up here. So my name is Beth Margison. I live at 24 Marcy Street. I'm a member of the public, but also I serve on the Zoning Board of Adjustment for Portsmouth. I just recently was appointed. Just a couple of observations from my very brief time on the board. I think we get a lot of appeals from the planning board, but I think a lot of the problems with the development now is that we are developing in more sensitive areas, and that is requiring another layer of review. Wetlands Conservation Commission has to go through that. So I think a lot of it is that development, because so much is developed, is actually going into other areas that are, probably increasing the regulatory process or just lengthening it. So, and the other thing, we've had to deal with appeals from the planning board on the ZBA for 105 Bartlett Street and 53 Green Street. And this week, we got a declaratory junction lawsuit filed by the developer seeking clarity on our scope of review and what should go to the Superior Court and what should go to the ZBA. And I think I welcome that, because I think that's very useful. I think that the community needs to know that now. I think it would be more useful if, for instance, in the zoning ordinance, we had explicitly stated that the CUPs, conditional use permits, and some of the wetlands development was innovative land use controls, and therefore you would have more clarity as to where these scopes of review are. I'm seeing a lot of little holes in the zoning ordinance that I think would provide clarity without having to go to Superior Court to get a Superior Court to get a declaratory junction. I will say the other thing in terms of regulatory issues is what's going on at the state level. The Mayor McEachern recently testified against the non-regulation of Airbnbs by local municipalities. If that goes through, that's going to be devastating in terms of affordable housing issues here in Portsmouth. I know a lot of people on both sides of development or just where Portsmouth is headed who want to do Airbnbs because it allows them to fund their own vacation. So I think that will be a real problem. Also, last year they implemented the Housing Appeals Board, which is an alternate appeal circuit for to the Superior Court for just housing units, not commercial or industrial. They recently overturned the decision on 105 Bartlett Street. The issue with that is that it is really more acting like a super planning board or zoning board of adjustment. They are regularly overturning a lot of decisions from local land use boards in a lot of towns. It's on their website right now. They have 40 applications under review, and there's been a lot of overturning of those decisions. Now, maybe that's good for people who are supporters of 105 Bartlett Street, but that impact on the local land use planning process may be very significant. It's on 105 Bartlett Street, they actually made some factual errors in our deliberations of that project. So I think that keeping an eye on what's happening with this Housing Appeals Board, that may cut both ways. It is meant to make the housing process more streamlined, but it also may undercut some local land use zoning initiatives. I think the Airbnb issue will be potentially very significant for Portsmouth. And I think also just in terms of where you're developing and how that adds to the regulatory process and the approval process is a significant issue. I mean, people are really concerned about wetlands. There's a lot of wetlands in Portsmouth. We have had projects, we allow development in the wetlands. I have personal feelings about that. My suspicion is that there's a lot of wetlands remediation work and perhaps overflow or sort of outfall treatment work that needs to be done, that the city is looking to allow private developers do it because it just saves them money. But I think the level of development in the wetlands really does need to be looked at. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else here that would like to speak?
We got 2 people with their hands up online.
Okay.
We'll get to them online after you. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ben Van Camp. I know most people in the room, but I'm the president of the Chamber Collaborative, the Portsmouth Chamber of Commerce. We're at 500 Market Street. I am just beyond excited about the opportunity that exists for this group. We, as the business voice in the community, have really identified affordable housing as the #1 barrier to business growth in our community. So we, as an organization, are incredibly focused on this. We're paying a lot of attention to actions in Concord and things like the short-term rental thing. We are actually, our board voted yesterday morning for us to oppose that, and I will be spending some time today reaching out to our legislative contacts to make sure they know that is going to be harmful to Portsmouth and harmful to our housing. So we are incredibly attuned to this. I just want to share a brief conversation I had with a local business owner, a hotel manager yesterday. He was actively trying to buy or rent housing in Portsmouth that he could then pass along to his staff. And some of that's required if you bring in visa students and things like that. But they're actively investing in this. And I think there's an opportunity for someone probably more creative than I am to find a way to harness that investment to be supportive of public-private partnerships or different projects that support housing that supports our workforce. So I just encourage you to think about how the business community can be engaged in this. I think everyone is very attuned to the need and willing to think creatively and be supportive of that. So that's my little pitch this morning. Thank you for volunteering your time and service to the community, because it's probably not going to be a fun task. So good for you.
Thank you very much. And we have a couple people on Zoom, Will.
We do. Let's start with Liza. Liza, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Liza Hewitt. I live at 726 Middle Road. I have to assume that you inadvertently left out residents in the formation of this committee. And in doing that, I really hope that you look at putting a couple of residents on your committee. I think that it's needed. And I think that before you get too far down the road, that's important. I want to very much thank Mr. Cracknell for his very thoughtful comments addressing residents' concerns and the importance of including residents in this conversation. I would encourage all of you to go back and listen to his portion of what he said today, because I think I think that he said a lot that needs to be heard. I have some real concerns with comments that I heard here earlier as the meeting was beginning about kind of pushing changes through in 30 days, for example, where ADUs are concerned. Included in these comments are that there are some small changes that we could tweak, not necessarily needing to include residents on those. This feels very top down to me. This feels like a group of people, getting together, and I understand that you are all residents, but you are in very different roles, and I don't know that you can serve that multiple role of, for instance, I'm a city councilor and I'm a resident. I'm a planning board member and I'm a resident. I think you need to hear residents that are residents, that have some concerns with the way development has been going in the city. So I would encourage you to look at getting some members of the community on your committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have somebody else?
Yeah. Working on it. Jim Smalley. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning and thank you. I just want to support what Lisa just said to broaden the committee's input by having residents on this and participate more actively on this committee, to broaden the view, think outside the box, and really get both a bottoms up and tops down approach. So thank you, Lisa, for that. My first question is, the root cause of this is a supply issue. So my question is, will you be looking at the existing codes, rules, regulations that constrain supply? Portsmouth problem, housing issues, it's decades in the making. And I know that you're looking for government solutions and LIHTCs and all that. Those are wonderful things to apply. But really look inside yourself and say, what have we done to limit supplies? What can we do to change that limit? I keep hearing how we're running out of land. I do know we're not running out of sky. And we have a height constraint on things, right? Very simple in terms of what can you do to increase supply that doesn't require additional government actions, doesn't require additional government regulations. Approach it from a green field. Say, do we really need these regulations? How do they impact supply? Impact supply, drive up the cost, and can you quantify it? We want to protect certain things. Absolutely, we want to protect the gem that's downtown. But do we actually need a historic district commission, or do we need a commission that focuses on those properties that are truly historic? Because everybody seems to want to control absolutely everybody else's property. I look over my fence and I say, what I control stops there at my property line. But there's this, it doesn't fit in the neighborhood. We have to make it look like this. We've got to make it look like that. It's endless. It needs to, you can never solve a supply problem when you don't allow those people who can come in and develop their properties to the maximum. And I'm not saying everything has to be 20-story towers, but we have created our own supply problem. And I think the government solutions are around the edges. Anyway, I thank you for your time and wish this committee luck.
Thank you very much.
All right, Robert White. Bob?
Good morning, and thank you. I guess there were just a couple things that I wanted to point out that really, in terms of the context for this, and I think the context for this consideration is extremely important for basically laying a foundation of understanding for the community for why, what are the issues around housing and how can we be strategic in having a relationship between our city's situation with housing and have a cause and effect between that information to be conveyed to the public, and then have a cause and effect between that and the zoning strategies that would happen. And I think it's really important that basic definitions and understandings be laid out for folks to understand. All you have to do is go on the Portsmouth, one of the Portsmouth Facebook sites, and people are saying, well, what is affordable housing? What is workforce housing? Is workforce housing a real, is this a real thing? There's all sorts of information out there, but it's actually fairly hard to discover, really what it is, unless you are pointed to like Seacoast Housing Coalition or New Hampshire Housing. You have to go and dig to have a profile of that. And I think, and as a result of that, there's some information I think that would also be very useful to the community. For instance, if you look at our, the most recent census data, is the cost of new construction in our city is 2 to 2.5 times the same comparable value of property that is basically existing building fabric. So the notion that we're going to do new construction to provide workforce housing at 2.5 times the cost of renovation or infill or things like that is, it's pretty hard to make that actually pencil out in intention. And I think, as we have seen in the past, I'm going to say 10 to 15 years of sort of city building of Portsmouth, is the notion that you're going to build higher and bigger and bigger and bigger to get the efficiency for affordable housing, is we have absolutely no foundation to actually have that happen. Because the cost of going higher, the more denser, is the economics of that are not always as they appear. So I guess I would encourage, don't just leap to the regulations and try to fix them. Please lay a foundation of understanding. And I'll just point out to a couple documents that are out there is, I think it was 2017, Portsmouth Listens hosted an extensively involved series of forums that resulted in a working paper for the city council on housing that led to some support for the gateway districts that were put in place. Rick Tainter gave a fabulous presentation on affordable housing. It's back in 2014. If anything, it's even more important now to have that foundation, even to have that as a point of comparison to where we stand now, is please look back to all the work that has been done to understand the housing situation over, in recent, reasonable recent history. And don't just go to the bylaws and think you're going to fix them without really laying this foundation of information so that people can get informed and have a better understanding of why we're doing all this. I would also reiterate that, that there are people in this community, and I guess I'll say I'm one of them, as the sort of founder of the Design Alliances. There are people with enormous depth of experience on this and dedication to the city. Some of us would be glad to participate or be a part of the committee, however would be appropriate. But I do think that it would be helpful to have more than just counselors and staff on the committee. With all due respect, you're all my friends and colleagues, but I really think it would be benefit from a little more outreach.
Thank you very much. We have someone else?
Nope, that's it.
All right. With that said, I in listening to some of the public comment, I did not intentionally leave residents out. We are, as we've all pointed out, all residents. It was a matter of trying to find the right people to actually start to pull together the actual data and the actual languages that we need to talk about. But the idea was to then go out to the community and get all of their feedback on the stuff that we look at. So any changes to the actual makeup of this committee will have to be a conversation with the mayor, which I will certainly be having with him as soon as possible. And I'd also like to finish with talking about our next meetings. I'd like to find a regular morning that works for everyone. I obviously rushed to kind of put together this first meeting so we could at least hit the ground running and get some tasks in front of us. But if you guys, would you prefer I send around, like I did before, a doodle poll about options of, I'm thinking like, the second whatever day of the week, and trying to do always morning if that's possible in this time frame. I certainly can do that. I'll take a look at my schedule and what works for some of us, and then I will send that out, and then we can try to get on the calendar to meet this way. I'd like to try monthly, regularly, obviously, in our individual works as subcommittees. I'm going to send around the contact information so that each of those groups can start to pull together. I'm going to ask the staff to try to get us some of the exact zoning of some of the stuff I wanted to start reviewing right away. And if anybody else has any input of what they want those groups to look like, please funnel it through me, and I can put together agendas, and we can start to set up some separate subcommittee meetings to really start doing some of the work.
Beth, could you just, I'd prefer just getting digital, not paper. And
That's fine. It was a little hard to send it out before the first meeting.
I understand. Just so, point of clarification, you said it, but I want to say it again. This committee's not adopting anything. We're coming up with ideas that will have a lot of public vetting before they actually get implemented.
It's going to go from city. We will recommend to city council. City council will send it down to planning board for review, at which point they will have, whether they do work sessions or they will also have public hearings. And once the public hearings and that level are done, it goes back to the city council, where there'll be 3 readings and public hearings before anything's enacted. So there will be lots of opportunity after we make a recommendation for the public to speak, but we hope the public will speak to us directly as well as we're working. And if nobody has anything else, then I will happily adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.